Hello and welcome to the two-man power trip of wrestling. I'm your host, JP John Poz. With me today, special guest. He's an author, a writer, a cartoonist, a podcaster, a YouTuber. He does it all. He is Mr. Steve Anderson. Steve, welcome in. How you doing?
Thank you, John. Happy to be here.
What is going on in your world? What are you up to?
Well, I after decades ago, or a couple decades ago, doing or working with Bobby Heenan on two books, I decided to turn that into a podcast and let people kind of hear what they were reading. We never did an audio book or anything like that, so I thought it would be something to pursue, and I did that, and it's really doing quite well, and the response is tremendous. A lot of love for Bobby Heenan, which that didn't
Yep.
surprise me at all.
Yeah, right. I mean, the brain is timeless. He's probably the greatest manager of all time. Might be the greatest color commentator
Yeah,
of all time.
yeah,
Right? It's up there at
yeah,
least.
definitely. He earned all those accolades, and we just had a tremendous time doing a couple books. The first book did well. The second book, with a different publisher, not so much, and not as well known either, as I have come to realize. But still, it was truly a labor of love. And Bobby and I, our families were close, and I got to attend WrestleMania, the 2004 Hall of Fame, with his family, and it was a tremendous experience. I'm sure you've seen the speech. It basically stole the show, and yeah, it was a tremendous experience among many other experiences with him.
Such a loaded Hall of Fame class too, and he
Yeah,
stole the show. Pretty amazing.
yeah. I have heard that it is considered like the greatest grouping
Yes.
of Hall of Fame, and it was actually the first one that was done in a long time. They had stopped doing it, and I remember when Bobby called me, he said, I'm going to be in the WWE Hall of Fame, and I thought, they still have that now? And yeah, he did, and he didn't write anything down. A lot of people, or there was a rumor about that I wrote it for him, which is ridiculous. you
Hmm.
can't you can't write for Bobby Heenan. You have to let Bobby Heenan be Bobby Heenan. But it was just this tremendous event. And after it was over, his wife, because he had been dealing with, he was diagnosed with cancer right after we submitted the first kind of take with the book. And he called me up and told me about the diagnosis of throat cancer. And even in the tapes that I have poured through endlessly, uh, he mentioned that he thought he had some TMJ or something like that. He thought something was going on, but it wasn't that serious. But for him to come back and steal the show, and I think Mick Foley said he was introducing Magnificent Morocco. Mick Foley said that he said a prayer backstage that please don't let me follow Bobby Heenan. You
Wow.
just can't follow Bobby Heenan. So yeah,
Yes. Wow, I love that.
yeah,
Weasel Tales is, of course, what it's called, right?
yeah. Weasel Tales is the podcast. I started, when I initially did it, the first few episodes, because I'll even show you. This is the actual mini tape recorder we used,
Old
and I
school.
have little mini cassette tapes that back in the day. This was in 2001, and so trying to figure out how to digitize it. It was, I talked to some friends and things like that, and it just came down to taking a podcast mic, putting the speaker close to it, and see what would happen. But when I initially started it, it was me talking about my time with Bobby. And then after about I would say 5 of those episodes. I was in the process of digitizing. Um, but after that, I thought, you know what? People want to hear Bobby. They want to hear him, his spot on comedic timing, just everything. And that's how it started. And like I said, it's been uh, just a fantastic experience, just knowing all the people. And what is really nice and rewarding is that there are people who never knew about Bobby Heenan, and they came across the podcast and they became, members, and it was a very it's nice to see that Bobby's humor kind of transcends the generations.
How did you initially meet Bobby the Brain? Obviously, I know you were in the business a little bit beforehand, but
Yeah.
how'd you actually meet him to like be able to be his, biographer, if you will?
Yeah. Well, I had read an interview he did, and he had mentioned how he'd like to write his autobiography. So, having worked at Pro Wrestling Illustrated, I contacted the guy you're going to contact who knows everybody, and that's Bill Apter. And I asked Bill if he would kind of be the liaison and see what we can do. Um, then I had a conversation with Bobby, and the old school wrestlers are very reserved, and they want the privacy, and more than anything, they don't want to be mocked or ridiculed or anything like that. So, and with Bobby, you have to build trust. And so he was on the phone. We did kind of a sample chapter. I put it together and I sent it to him. And he paid me the best compliment he could have. He said that sounds like me. And then it was a matter of finding a publisher. And at that time, I think I was no, I was done with Wow Magazine, but I still had some contacts. So there was this one little publisher that I had spoken to in the past about other projects, and they jumped on it. They no, actually, no, I should take that back. They initially turned it down, and
Wow.
then a prominent Chicago sportscaster, and I can't remember his name, was having lunch with one of these guys, and they or the guy brought up, yeah, we had the Bobby Heenan autobiography pitched to us. And the first thing he said was, well, you said yes, right? And he said, no. And he said, you idiot. The next thing I know, it was very strange, because it was like a couple days after we were turned down, they were calling back, and they admitted that this prominent individual kind of took them to task for not doing that. So Bobby came up here. I live in Minnesota, and it was actually around 9/11, and he was going to fly, but then he could then no airplanes were going anywhere, and so he came up and sat in a hotel room for 3-4 days, perhaps enjoying some adult beverages. We're to the point where I had to call my wife and say, "You gotta drive me home." Bobby liked to bend the elbow, certainly, and so that's how it was. And it was the first day was surreal. I was nervous, and here sitting across from me is the greatest wrestling manager commentator of all time. But it was just so easy with him, and we connected and became great friends. Our families knew each other, and that's how it all started. And the success of that book led to another book, which was not as successful, but something I'm still very proud of. And Bobby was definitely into doing a second book.
I love that. Initially, though, you said Wow magazine, which was great. You were with PWI as well. Is that like
Yeah,
the
I was
intro
with.
to the business?
Yes. Yeah. My first introduction to the business was with Pro Wrestling Illustrated. I had been drawing since I was a kid, and I did some local editorial cartoons and that kind of thing. And I thought about this concept of like, kind of inserting professional wrestling into it. And so I sent a few samples to Stu Sachs, and I had a regular day job at the time, and Stu or my wife called me at work, and she said, "There's someone in the voicemail named Stu Sachs," and I thought, well, you can't be ribbing me because you don't know who Stu Sachs is, so
Yeah,
I called
yeah.
him, and it was originally the quarterly magazine. I think it was back then. It was Wrestling 90 or 91 or something like that. And so I did that, and that did well, and the response was good. So I started started doing cartoons for the monthly The Wrestler, and then for a brief amount of time they had a weekly kind of newsletter to kind of keep up with the Meltzers and the Kellers and that kind of thing. And so I did that. And then I had the opportunity to start actually writing for them. And that was just a tremendous experience. And then one day I get a call from Bill Apter saying, "I'm leaving PWI for this other magazine. And do you want to come with?" And they were paying significantly more. It didn't last as long, of course, as PWI, but it was nice to be kind of on the ground floor of something that was new. And like I said, it didn't last long, but it was still a tremendous experience. Like Bobby Heenan, traveling with Bill Apter is also can have its challenges. Bill kind of gets lost, and you got to kind of look around for him and that kind of thing.
So when you're initially working with Bobby the Brain Heenan, you mentioned obviously you know him very well, just as far as his career. So were you a big fan? Were you like, where did you grow up? Like, were you a AWA fan, WWF fan? Like, what were you when you were growing up?
When I was a kid, and this is a real vivid memory for me, the kind of the first time I saw professional wrestling. My grandmother loved to watch professional wrestling, and so I'm over at her house, and she always saw television as not a solo thing. She needed someone there with her. So I'm sitting there, and she plops me down in front of the TV. She sits in her chair, and All Star Wrestling was playing on the television, and she. So I'm just watching, and I'm just mesmerized by it. And it was the episode where Ray Stevens broke the leg of Dr. X, and that was my introduction to it. And honestly, I was kind of hooked. I started watching the episodes or the show myself. I mean, we didn't have at that time. You didn't have access to WWF and NWA unless you had a satellite or and eventually it was cable and you could watch that kind of thing. But yeah, that's really how it all started. And like I said, I was hooked ever since. And had it turned into a career, and made a lot of friends. And of course, the best friend I made was Bobby Heenan, and it was a tremendous kind of experience. Like I said, out of body, just being there, especially on that first day.
When you initially start working with him, what's like his thoughts? Like he's like trying to get a read for you, make sure that you're a good writer, or make sure you're not like a big fan. He wants to like what's like the initial thing with him? Because it seems like he's very keen on like let's make sure this guy's not like he's
Oh,
a huge fan.
there's no doubt about it. There is a level of trust that you have to establish, especially with old school wrestlers. And I found that out with Bobby and other older wrestlers that I would interview for the magazines. There is, there's trust. At first they're reticent, and they'll kind of overthink things, or they'll get a little nitpicky, and you just got to roll with it, and eventually, Bobby, and I don't think it really took a long time for Bobby to do that. I think he wanted to do this, and he selected me to do it. And I was more than willing. And I was well aware even before that, yeah, I'm going to have to earn some trust here. And it was really, honestly, the initial sample chapter that I had sent to him, where I kind of think we got over that hump. And then when we were face to face, that was, another step, another very necessary step. Again, when it comes to these the older wrestlers.
With him, is he like exactly what you would think, or is that more of a character? Like, are you actually talking to Bobby the Brain, or is he different as far as him in real life?
He's in real life, he's like a stand-up comedian, and he could have been a stand-up comedian. He was kind of the what's the word I want to use here? He was mischievous. He liked to tease you. And that kind of thing. So there's a lot of Bobby Heenan in Bobby Heenan. What you see is what you get. He likes to have fun. He likes to traveling with him is difficult because he would talk to people, and he would just kind of goof around with people, not in a malicious way or anything like that. He was just a lot of fun. But occasionally, I'd be walking, and he wouldn't be next to me, and I'd have to go back and kind of pull him away and things like that. So it was just a combination of all that. And I think the only time that he was, emotional was obviously, when he talked about his mother and his grandmother, but really when he talked about Gorilla Monsoon, he really had a hard time, and it hadn't been that long since Gorilla had passed away, and he would choke up. And in fact, one of the podcasts I have that I posted, Gorilla Monsoon, he was talking about Gorilla Monsoon. And when Bobby went to WCW, and it was their last night together. And I really struggled with, okay, how do I want to, do I want to do this? But I thought, no, I need to show this. I need to show that there's a side to Bobby Heenan that is very sweet, very tender. And I felt that the only way I could do justice to the legacy of Gorilla Monsoon was showing how his best friend reacted to that loss. So,
Wow. Great stuff. Like, as far as being able to capture that, because him and Gorilla, man, they were the best combination of team, but it's great to know that behind the scenes it was the same way.
Oh, they were just thick as thieves. They loved each other, and their families loved each other. And to hear those stories, I mean, if it doesn't bring a tear to your eye, I don't know what will, really. So
they were the best. Come on. And he's like, will you stop? Will you be
serious? You stop.
He's like, I'll have you thrown out of here.
Just tremendous stuff.
So they're basically almost like ribbing each other out there, right? I mean, they're just joking around, and they're doing whatever they want out there in commentary.
Oh yeah, and it's amazing that they didn't start laughing more, and I'm sure that those were edited out and everything, but yeah, they were, people have called them the Abbott and Costello of professional wrestling, that kind of thing, and I think that fits quite well. Yeah, he was absolutely devastated by that, and yeah, it was rough for him. But I think to remember Gorilla, and I tried to, we talked a lot about Gorilla, and and what they did, and yeah, he was a major. Well, he was his best friend, so he was a pivotal person in his life, certainly.
I was just listening to him on an old interview, and he said Gorilla Monsoon told him, "If you're not in this business to make money, what the hell are you in it for?" Like
No,
great, like
I think Bobby put it to me as if you're not in this business for money, you're a fool.
yes, exactly. There you go. Yep, yep,
Yeah, and that's the old school attitude, and it's not so much. I think people misinterpret that as, well, you need to have the passion. Well, of course, you need to have the passion for anything you're gonna
yeah.
pursue, particularly professional wrestling. But at the end of the day, you got to get paid, And my time, I spent some time in independent, just helping out with independent promotions and stuff, just to kind of get a feel for, how that was. And I had a friend who was very much involved with that. And I remember a show at a hockey rink, and they had put all the wood over it and everything, and they had a match, and the boys were standing outside waiting for the payoffs, and the promoter had left out the back door. I've seen that happen a few times, but yeah, that's what can happen. That was, so I really got kind of a in-depth look at that, and sometimes it was funny, sometimes it just wasn't, because these guys just busted their ass, and all of a sudden, the promoter is taking the gate away from them, that kind of thing.
Man, another thing I noticed too, when people were interviewing him, for whatever reason, they think it's cool, or they think they're going to get an answer from Heenan that might be the answer they want to hear. Whenever he talks about Hulk Hogan, I always find that so fascinating because obviously on air he rips Hogan, doesn't like Hogan, which
Yeah,
is all because the crowd hates Heenan. So whatever he says, they're going to do want the opposite.
exactly.
But it works in Hogan's favor, obviously, and
Yeah.
obviously him and Hogan are friends. But I love that when people try to, right, Hogan. He's like, no, Hogan's the greatest worker of all time. Like
Oh yeah,
I love his response about Hogan because he's dead on accurate.
he did. And in fact, when he was in WCW and Hulk Hogan turned heel, Bobby really didn't quite know how to respond.
Yeah,
It's like, well, I'm a heel too, but on screen, I hate this guy.
yeah,
And so I think he found the best balance he could to kind of keep that storyline, going. But yeah, it was a difficult thing for him, because now all of a sudden, you know, he, Bobby Heenan's not a baby face. He can be funny, and he can, make people laugh, but his main character is the heel.
and if you look at it too, he was saying Hogan, he's the best worker because he puts the most asses in the seats and he makes the most money, and
Yeah.
that the guys that are bitter towards Hogan were the guys that didn't work with Hogan because they didn't make the money because
Yeah.
they weren't working with Hogan. I mean,
Oh
great
yeah.
great thought by Heenan too. Like he's really everything he says is very well thought out, and he knows exactly what he's talking about.
Yeah, yeah, and when Bobby was in the AWA, the promotion that I grew up on, and when and Hogan was here, but not for very long. And it was, I think, the unwillingness of Vern Gagne to give him the strap, even though Greg will do interviews saying, "Oh, he was going to get the belt, but not," and that kind of thing. And I just think Vern Gagne's view of what a wrestling promotion should be was never going to change, and Hulk Hogan just didn't fit. And Bobby was one of the initial people he brought with him, and the rest is history. The AWA is long gone, and WWE still is chugging along. So.
And if you look at it, how many bait and switches did they have with him and Bockwinkel? He wins a title, loses a title. You know what I mean?
That's the thing. There's a I remember one clip in particular where I don't know if it was the first time he won the title or what it was. I think that happened twice.
Yep.
But I think one of those times, the audience knew that Hulk Hogan wasn't the champion. The second time, the people were sent home, and I may be misremembering this. People were sent home, and in the official AWA video, they say Eric Bischoff does the voiceover saying, Hulk Hogan did not become the champion. And I thought, wow, you sent these people home thinking that Hulk Hogan was the champion.
Yep.
And the decision making was just off. And it was Vern just kind of sticking to his guns as far as his vision of professional wrestling. And that vision didn't have Hulk Hogan in it.
Yeah.
And it was unfortunate.
And funny.
People say, well, what if Hulk Hogan had stayed? I think Vince was all ready to, take people and stuff like that. Yeah. So I think the AWA, I don't think that very much could have saved that promotion.
But it's funny, Hogan, obviously, that's the big deal that the AWA loses. But Mean Gene and Bobby the Brain, that's two huge losses to them. I mean, they're like the faces and the voices of WWF.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. And it was strange because, I had never seen WWF. And then Vince was going from TV station to TV station saying, hey, here's a bunch of money, put my show on. And that's when I saw that. And I remember seeing Bobby Heenan all of a sudden show up. And it was actually at the Met Center in Minneapolis. And all of a sudden, there's Bobby Heenan coming down the aisle. So
crazy.
That was something. And you knew the winds were changing, certainly.
Man, when you think about it too, Bobby the Brain, him with Andre sets off the fact that Andre is a heel. As soon as you see Bobby the Brain with Andre, it's like, oh my God, Andre is a bad guy. You know what I mean? That's the power of the Brain.
Yeah. And that's the thing. And I think I think I posted it as a podcast, but Bobby had no idea. And one day Andre says, we're going to have some fun, boss. And Bobby didn't know what he was talking about. And then they turned him heel. And Bobby's approach to it was that Andre, when he was out in public, was not the nicest man in the world. And I witnessed that at the Met Center once, where he kind of brushed off a bunch of kids, and mumbled something and just kept going on his way. But yeah, I think Heenan was the only one who could really kind of solidify that heel aspect of Andre. You needed that. And because Andre was still really popular. And so, but you put him with Bobby Heenan, and now all of a sudden, and that's really due to, what Bobby can do to get over a wrestler who was turned, and especially Andre, who was a babyface pretty much. Maybe there were a few matches here and there that we didn't see, but for the most part, that was a shock. I think any wrestling fan who was around just could not believe that was happening. But then again, you loved it at the same time. You're like, okay, here's this new dynamic. Where is this going?
So cool, because if you look at it, it's like, wow, Andre and Hogan, this is unbelievable. Sets off WrestleMania 3, sets off all these other pay-per-views behind it because they wanted to make so much money off them. But it's basically because everybody hates Heenan. They associate Heenan and Hogan with that feud. So Andre gets thrown in the mix, which is just like absolutely gigantic. But it's all because Heenan is so hated. And Heenan you're saying he didn't even realize he was going to manage Andre.
Andre said, we're going to have some fun, boss. And Bobby said, oh, okay. And then he, talked to Vince, and this is what we're doing. And I think there was some, doubt. Well, are the people really going to boo Andre? Well, you insert Bobby Heenan into this, and now they're gonna be upset. And it was a good way to really solidify Hogan's kind of position in the company too. So it just worked on every type of level, certainly.
Did Bobby ever talk about as far as like Vince saying like you're the right guy for Andre, like what was the thought process behind that behind the scenes? Because obviously it's a home run.
Well, yeah, and I don't know specifically maybe what Vince said, but you know it at that time, like I said, WWF was just killing it, you know, and you know there was a time when Vince McMahon was, you know, kind of getting things right as opposed to you know, kind of the latter part of his career there, certainly. And I think that's what happens when, you know, the older wrestlers, promoters just kind of hang on too long. But yeah, Bobby just looks at that time with. I think that if he could pick a highlight of his career, I think it would have been that, certainly, because you know you're at the what was the venue they did WrestleMania through, the Silverdome.
Silverdome. Yep.
You know, and it was huge, and it was the massive crowds, and yeah, I mean, it was. I think that was the first WrestleMania I actually got to see, and it was wow. It was really something.
And to be a part of that, it's just crazy. And be a part of the main event
Oh
of
yeah.
that, along with Hogan and Andre.
Exactly. And you know, and honestly, you really didn't know how it was going to go. I mean, you thought, well, it could be either of them. You know, Hogan could retain or Andre could beat him, and Andre did get what a couple hours with the belt.
Yeah.
But still, he's got the designation. You know, and
Yep.
but yeah, I mean that was really one of the few matches where you really didn't know how it was going to go, because you had Hogan, you had Andre, and then you had Bobby Heenan. Which, okay, what's he going to do? How's he going to muck it up and get involved and that kind of thing?
When you look at Heenan and the WWF, do you like him better as a commentator or a manager? Because it's a toss up when you think about it.
Yeah, it is. It's a toss up. You know, when he transitioned to being a commentator, he was, you know, he was sore. He was on the road a lot and that kind of thing. And he had just really kind of just that part of his life was done now. And I think he was already doing it, but I think the transition to commentary for a guy who could, you know, talk and cut a promo like he could, it was easy. And then on top of that, you know, working with, you know, Gorilla Monsoon. So yeah, I think that was one of the easier transitions for him, and it's something he really wanted to do. He wanted to get off the road. He was tired and had a lot of nagging injuries, and he slipped in quite well, and yeah, he, again, you know, people refer to him as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, you know, color commentators in the industry. And that's the thing about what I really found, and I kind of knew this, but when you're associated with Bobby Heenan, people just are really excited about that, and it's all kinds of people, and it you know, when I was at WrestleMania, you know, I'm walking, you know, with Bobby, and they're like, "Who's this guy?" And someone said, "Oh, he wrote Bobby's book," and they're, "Oh, you want to write my book?" That kind of thing,
Right.
But yeah, I mean, there are a few people just so universally respected in that industry, and boy, that's Bobby. You know, he just from where he started as a kid, you know, working, you know, with Dick the Bruiser, which is a man that he didn't think very well of. But in fact, I've one of the episodes, I think it was yesterday, was on Dick the Bruiser, and at first he didn't want to talk about him, and then I brought up something else. We were talking, and it wasn't anything deliberate, but then all of a sudden he started talking about him. And I thought, wow, okay, and yeah, that was. that was not an easy time for him. Certainly, he just felt very disrespected and doesn't have a lot of nice things to say about Dick the Bruiser.
Dick the Bruiser, not his mentor. Wilbur Snyder is his mentor.
Yeah,
correct?
Wilbur. I was going to say too. Yes, he did take time to say that Wilbur Snyder, he had much respect for, but Dick the Bruiser, Bobby was basically an errand boy, and that's a good distinction that you make there, because Wilbur Snyder, yeah, he's the one who taught Bobby the ins and outs of wrestling. Dick the Bruiser used him as an errand boy who had to call him every day at 10 o'clock in the morning and at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And if he didn't do that, he wouldn't get paid. That's according, and the relationship was not good, but and that was another part of the book writing experience that should I put that in there? But he brought it up, and all of a sudden he was ready to talk about it. And it could have been, I gained enough trust to hear that story. But that was for him, his introduction to wrestling was not the best. But thank God for Wilbur Snyder, who was Bobby has nothing but nice things to say about him.
When you look at the book, right, what was the best experience as far as writing with him, or maybe like the best story, or like what like stood out the most to you, just hanging out with him, the experience and putting it into the book?
Honestly, it really was the early days of his life, because I knew about the AWA. I knew about WrestleMania. I think just there's in the first book, he is talking about the first time he ever went to a wrestling match, and how the heel could say, would control the crowd. They would boo him. They would, throw things at him, and he had all this power, and Bobby just became enthralled with the theatricality of it almost. And that was, I remember that, because as he's telling me this, you can see that he's just reliving it and kind of getting himself back to a time where, everything was new. Everything was different. And ultimately, I think too, is he was making money for his mom and for his aunt. And his aunt was very sick with cancer. But that's, the payoffs, I think, went right to his mom. I don't think he kept a penny. That was his goal. He wanted to turn that passion that he had, initially had for professional wrestling and feed his family. And that's a term he used a lot. Feed his family. That's what he wanted to do. And I think that part of the book was, you really just saw, the good man he was, or the kid, or whatever. I mean, he was 15 years old, and he was, hanging around the wrestling business. That's what he wanted to do, and he did it. And that he has countless stories, certainly, and they're all funny and stuff. But this was just really, to me, it kind of defined him. Even though he was talking about the time when he was a kid, I think it really defined the type of man he was. And I think that's just one of my favorite aspects of the book.
What was maybe the worst experience writing the book, if there was anything bad about it?
Well, I would say, and I'll be very careful with this, I will say the publishing industry was not something that Bobby liked. He made a comment at one. We had a lot of disagreements and misunderstandings and that kind of thing. And it was a long time ago, and I don't hold a grudge. But I think in a lot of ways, Bobby felt very disrespected, and I felt like they were disrespecting him too. Like they like I said earlier, when they initially turned down the book, and then they were going to do the book and that kind of thing. It was like they were doing us a favor, and that was the dynamic. But that is something that I did. Another role that I played was to be the point person for talking to the publisher. Bobby did not want to talk to them at all. And so I was a point person, and they tell me something, I'd massage it, tell it to Bobby, and we moved on. That was difficult because Bobby is somebody who commands respect, especially in the obviously in the professional wrestling industry.
Yep.
But I think overall, he did feel disrespected and would say, boy, I thought wrestling was a dirty business and that kind of thing. It's tough. Publishing a book is not easy. Now, this is before, you could have your book published. You write a book, you send it to somebody, send them some money, and you get a book,
Right.
and that would have been nice. If we could have had maybe 10, 15 years, we could have done something like that where and we'd have control of it. But I think that really was something that it just kind of the nuts and bolts of publishing. He really wasn't a fan of, but we just kept plugging along, and we were, we kind of held each other up sometimes too, with frustrations and that kind of thing. Because I didn't want to see him disrespected. I mean, they can disrespect me, they can call me whatever they want, but that's Bobby Heenan. You don't disrespect Bobby Heenan. So that was, again, I can't say too much about it, but that's kind of the broad brush strokes of that experience.
Now, as far as like current wrestling, do you watch any current wrestling? Do you still follow wrestling or no?
I do. It's always, for the longest time, especially when WCW was sold, I kind of got away from it a little bit and stuff, but I would watch it and I would keep up with it and I would read things about it. It's just kind of in my DNA, and I would always like get the pay-per-views. That's what I would do. Maybe I didn't watch a whole lot of Raw, but you can go on YouTube, you can see excerpts and things like that, and just get an idea of what's going on and everything. And then when AEW came around, I got really excited about that, and of course they're still a new promotion. They're trying to find their way, and who knows how it goes. That's another thing, and he's with WWE now, but one of the other friends I had in the industry was CM Punk. CM Punk and a bunch of guys from Chicago would come to the West St. Paul Armory, and I lived literally a block and a half from there, and really got to know these guys: CM Punk, Colt Cabana, Ace Steel, just a bunch of guys. And to see where they went from there is just tremendous. And I will say that even back then, and I it's not, kind of, what do I want to say? Well, to me, I saw something special in CM Punk back then, especially with the fans. He had stringy blonde hair, long blonde hair. He had basketball shorts, but you could see something with him, with the fans and the audience, that there was this connection and stuff that really, the other guys, hey, they got great pops, great reactions, but there was just something special about him. And knowing him back then, it was, it was a lot of fun. And then the promoter decided he didn't want to use the Chicago guys anymore, who a lot of them would be future, big deals. And I came to the building, and Punk approached me and said, And I found out that it would be the last night for the Chicago boys, which was baffling to me because that was their draw. And the promotion didn't last long after that. And Punk came up to me and he said, "Did you hear what's happening?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "What are you doing tonight?" Because I try to help out and everything. I said, "I think I'm ringing the bell or something like that." He said, "Can you get the microphone close to you?" Because he was in the main event. I said, "I can do that, you know." And so his match was going, and I would kind of tap the microphone a little bit, tap it over and tap. And his match was done, and he got right out of the ring, and I grabbed the mic, and the promoter saw me, and I handed it to him. And I don't think that was his first pipe bomb by any stretch of the imagination.
Right.
But it was nice to be nice to be part of it back then. But yeah, that whole crew from Chicago was that really kind of, because there was a lapsed amount of time when I wasn't really going to shows, and having it, you know, practically in my backyard. Of course I'd go, and then to meet all these hugely talented people who would go on to greater things. That was a lot. That meant a lot to me.
Did you get in trouble, by the way, for handing him the microphone?
Yeah, I did. Well, there's nothing you could do about it, and I wasn't invited. If I wanted to go to a show, I'd have to pay, and I didn't have any interest.
Yep.
If you don't have these guys, with all due respect to the others, you know, what are you doing? You know, so yeah, it wasn't looked upon very well, but hindsight now, hey, you know.
Are you still a CM Punk guy though? Are you still loving him?
Oh, I do. And what happened, you know, what happened in AEW and stuff, and I think, you know, wrestling, you know, I don't think there's any reason to really take sides. It was just something that wasn't working, and I think, you know, no one can say that they acted the best they could in that. I don't think anyone's saying that. You know, no one has clean hands in that. But I wish it had gone another way, certainly. But having him back in WWE, I think that's. I think for him that was just kind of necessary because of the way he left.
Yeah.
And so yeah, but yeah, back then he was something. He was really something.
Do you watch current WWE? Do you follow, like, as far as like weekly, every day, or not every day, every week you watch it and stuff like that?
Yeah, I try to. Yeah, I mean, I have grandchildren now, so sometimes, you know, and they don't live very far from me, and I'm often on call for sleepovers or
Nice.
pick them up at school and that kind of thing. But I really try. If I can't see it, then I'll hunt down an article about it. It's always going to be something, and the podcast. I mean, you know, of course I'm going to still be a wrestling fan, and I'm going to, you know, watch it when I can, you know, catch a pay-per-view or a premium live event is what they're calling it now. Yeah, that is always going to be something that I'm not going to just, you know, step away from. You know, I've had, you know, ups, you know, especially, you know, working for or helping out wrestling promotions. You know, I had a pretty significant amount of time because I was spending too much time away. But I think now that, you know, I can, you know, maintain a balance. But yeah, that's just since I was 8 years old, you know, that's just part of it. And people say, oh, it's this, oh, it's fake, and that kind of, you know. And it's funny though, Bobby once said, he said, oh, that wrestling, I don't watch that stuff. Hey, whatever happened to Pepper Gomez? Like, well, how do you know that? You know, that kind of thing. And that's kind of the way it is with me, you know. So
That's a great line. Pepper goes. That's good. Yeah, it's interesting. Like with Bobby the Brain, I wonder what he would think about like current wrestling. Would he like it? Not like it? I wonder what he would kind of think.
I think he just loved wrestling, and I think I think his biggest beef, you know, whether especially in WCW, was, you know, the decision making process. I think, you know, he loved wrestling from the first time he saw it, and I still believe to his, you know, dying breath, he was still in love with professional wrestling. He just loved it because, and I think a lot of that is also, he was able to support his family with it initially, with his aunt and his mom, and then when he got married, he could, have create a good life for his wife, Cindy, and his daughter, Jessica. And that's I think he still would be. I think he would. Well, when we were doing the book, he would call me and say, "Hey, did you see what happened on da 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 da?" And there's so many out of body experiences. I don't think I ever truly got. There would always be these. My God, I'm talking to Bobby Heenan right now. This is crazy, And but he was just tremendous, and yeah.
As we hit the wind down and we head towards the finish, want to mention, of course, Bobby the Brain Heenan, Wrestling's Bad Boy Tells All. That's book 1. Obviously, book 2 is Chair Shots and Other Obstacles, Winning Life's Wrestling Matches. Your 2 books with Bobby the Brain Heenan. Where could everybody, if they want to, find the books? And where could everybody find Weasel Tales? Maybe go a little weasel hunting.
Weasel Tales. The books are on, I would say, the secondary market now. If you have a local bookstore, if you go on eBay, maybe Amazon will have something. I wish I had more books with me, but I only have a few, and obviously I'm going to hold on to those. As far as Weasel Tales, it is on YouTube, Rumble. It is on, and it's also on major podcast networks, and you can check it out in whatever format or network that you want to. And I'm very happy about, we're not the biggest podcast in the world, but boy, I'll tell you, the fan base is tremendous, and I know, and they better be watching this and give a little support to you too.
Yes.
But it's always going to be part of who I am. So,
remember Lee Marshall on the WCW Road Report would always go, "I'm weasel hunting," or he'd be like, "I'm gonna go find and get some weasel stew." He would always have a nice weasel line for Bobby the Brain. Or as Mongo would call him, Bobby the Stain Heenan. Mongo McMichael used to call him that.
I never quite understood that, but oh well.
Trying to be funny, I guess, but it's just
that's
not his.
That's okay.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure Bobby liked him because he's a Chicago boy. So.
Oh yeah. People in the Midwest, we all try to stick together.
Now, as far as you and your social media and everything you've got going on, where can everybody find you? Website, social media, everything you got going on.
The website there is a Weasel Tales website, weaseltales.com. It has not been monitored as much as I would want to. The past couple months have been kind of busy, kind of hectic. But what you did was you motivated me to get the episodes onto other podcast platforms. I spent pretty much the whole day doing that, so I thank you for that.
No problem.
There is a weaseltales.com that I will start adding content to. I believe that there are links that you can go straight to the podcast through weaseltales.com, and I will check that after we talk or we end our conversation here. And so yeah, it's like I said, podcasting is something you just got to keep going and keep going and keep going. And there were a couple months where there were other things happening, but we're past all that. And now, and especially, you having me on your show, I very much appreciate that. Definitely.
No problem. Thank you for joining me tonight. Appreciate it all the time. Steve Anderson, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.